They laughed when she dropped her rifle. The sound echoed across the training deck like a slap metal against concrete, sharp, final, embarrassing. A few recruits snorted. Some couldn't help but chuckle outright. The laughter was quick, nervous even, but loud enough to cut through the morning silence of the Navy base. And standing there, red-faced, trembling slightly, was a young woman named Clara Hayes, the only female recruit in that batch. The air was thick with salt and heat. The sea stretched beyond the base, a glittering mirror that made everything else look small. But in that moment, Clara didn't notice the ocean. All she could feel was the weight of the mistake, the eyes on her, and the deep thud of her heart that refused to slow down. She had trained for months for this. She had promised herself she wouldn't give them a reason to laugh. Her rifle, a standard-issue Navy M16, had slipped from her hands during the drill inspection. The sergeant's jaw tightened as the laughter continued. Clara bent down quickly, scooping it up, her fingers fumbling as if the weapon itself was mocking her. The metallic taste of shame filled her mouth. "Quiet!" barked the sergeant, his voice slicing through the laughter. The recruits stiffened. "Do you think this is funny?" No one answered, but a smirk here and there betrayed them. Clara could feel the heat of humiliation crawling up her neck. The sergeant turned his glare on her. "You drop your rifle again, Hayes, and you'll be scrubbing decks till next Christmas." "Yes, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Louder." "Yes, sir." She stood at attention again, rifle steady now, jaw set. But the laughter, though silenced, had done its work. It dug into her chest like a hook, and when she closed her eyes that night in the barracks, she still heard it. Over the next few days, Clara became the silent shadow in her unit. She woke before everyone else. She cleaned, ran, and trained harder than anyone. But it didn't matter, the others had already decided she didn't belong. They called her Butterfingers behind her back and sometimes to her face when the sergeants weren't around. She tried to ignore them, tried to keep her head down, but inside something was starting to change. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, a cold determination like a fuse burning slowly. One night during a late training exercise, Clara stayed behind after everyone else had gone to bed. She practiced disassembling and reassembling her rifle under a dim yellow light. Her hands trembled at first, but by the 10th try they were steady. The rifle wasn't her enemy anymore. It was becoming an extension of her will. The next morning, when the unit assembled for shooting drills, Clara didn't speak. She just stepped up to the range. The others exchanged smirks. "Let's see if she can even hold it this time," someone whispered. Clara ignored it. The sergeant called out the commands. She fired. Bang. The first bullet hit the target dead center. Bang. The second, same place. By the 5th, everyone had stopped whispering. Even the sergeant's eyebrows rose slightly. When she turned, the smirks were gone. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply reloaded and went again. By the end of the session, she had the highest accuracy score of the entire group. But that didn't win her their respect. Not yet. Because the real test, the one that would make her name remembered, was still coming. 2 weeks later, a rumor swept through the base. Admiral James Rourke was coming to inspect the recruits personally. He was legendary, a man known for finding potential where others saw none. But he was also feared. His inspections were brutal. Every mistake was magnified. Every weakness exposed. When the announcement came, the entire unit went silent. For the first time, even the cocky ones stopped laughing. On the morning of the inspection, the recruits lined up under the blazing sun, uniforms spotless, rifles gleaming. Clara stood in the 3rd row, her heart pounding. Admiral Rourke appeared at the far end of the field, his white uniform almost glowing. His presence was magnetic, the kind that silenced a crowd without a word. The sergeant barked the commands, and the drill began. The recruits moved in perfect synchronization, or almost perfect. The Admiral's eyes scanned every motion like radar. When he stopped near Clara's row, she felt her throat tighten. He paused in front of her. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, met hers for a moment. Then he looked at her hands. "Rifle inspection," he said quietly. Clara obeyed, presenting her weapon. He examined it, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Carry on." Relief flooded her chest until the unthinkable happened. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the air. Somewhere down the line, a recruit had tripped, his rifle colliding into another's. The noise startled several others, and one, right beside Clara, stumbled. The butt of his rifle hit her arm. Her rifle slipped. Time slowed. The weapon fell again, clattering against the ground. The sound rang across the field like thunder, and once again, they laughed. It wasn't everyone, but enough. The chuckles, the gasps, the half-suppressed grins. The same humiliation surged through her veins, only this time it was worse, because the Admiral was there. The sergeant froze. The Admiral's head turned slowly. The laughter died immediately. He stared at the recruits, his eyes narrowing, then looked down at Clara's rifle lying on the concrete. The silence was suffocating. "Pick it up," he said softly. Clara bent, her fingers trembling. She stood upright, gripping the rifle tightly, eyes locked straight ahead. The Admiral didn't speak for a long moment. The air felt heavy, thick. Everyone was waiting for him to explode, to shout, to reprimand. Instead, he said something no one expected. "Do you all find this funny?" His voice was calm, almost gentle. No one answered. I asked a question. "No, sir," the recruits shouted in unison. He took a step forward, his tone still even. "Because it seems some of you think dropping a rifle is the worst mistake a sailor can make. Let me tell you something. I've seen men drop rifles in real combat. I've seen chaos, fire, and fear. What matters is not the fall. It's what happens after." His gaze fell on Clara again. "You dropped it. Twice. So tell me, Recruit Hayes, what happens after?" Clara swallowed hard. "You pick it up, sir," she said quietly. The Admiral's expression didn't change. "Do you mean that?" "Yes, sir." "Show me." And before anyone could react, he reached over, took the rifle from her hands, and threw it across the deck. It skidded, spinning, metal scraping against the ground until it stopped several feet away. Gasps rippled through the line. "Now," he said, "pick it up." Clara didn't hesitate. She ran forward, grabbed the rifle, and came back to position. The Admiral nodded slightly. Again. He threw it again, harder this time. The sound of it hitting the ground made everyone flinch. Clara sprinted after it, retrieved it, returned, breath heavy but eyes steady. He did it again, and again. By the fifth time, no one dared breathe. Her palms were raw, her uniform streaked with dust, but she never broke form. Finally, the Admiral stopped. He walked toward her slowly, hands behind his back. The recruits watched in silence, their faces pale. He looked at Clara, then turned to the others, and that's when he said the words that froze every soul on the deck. "Everyone," he said, his voice sharp now, "stand." The command struck like a wave. Every recruit straightened instantly, boots clicking in unison. The air was tense, electric. Admiral Rourke stood tall before them, his gaze sweeping over the line of faces that only moments ago had been full of smirks and whispers. Now no one dared to blink. "You will stand," he said, his tone hard as steel for someone who has shown more discipline, courage, and resilience than most of you have in your bones. No one moved. Clara stood there, chest heaving, dust on her sleeves, the rifle trembling slightly in her grip. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the rest of his words. Recruits. Rourke continued, pacing slowly in front of them. You laughed when she dropped her rifle. Twice. You thought that proved weakness. But what I just saw was the definition of strength. I threw that weapon across this deck, and every single time she picked it up, without complaint, without hesitation. She didn't look for excuses, and she didn't look for your approval. She did what a sailor is supposed to do. She kept going. His words sank into the silence, heavy and sharp. Clara didn't dare lift her eyes, afraid the tears stinging behind them might fall. Rourke turned suddenly to face her. Recruit Hayes. Sir, she answered, voice steady. He nodded once. That's how you earn respect. Not by never falling, but by refusing to stay down. Then, turning back to the group, he said, I want every one of you to remember this moment. The Navy doesn't need perfect soldiers. It needs the ones who keep standing when the rest have given up. The sergeant behind them stood frozen, eyes wide, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. The recruits, once so sure of themselves, now looked like children caught in a storm. Admiral Rourke motioned to Clara. Step forward. She obeyed, standing directly before him, unsure what would come next. Front and center, he said. Shoulder arms. She lifted her rifle, her movements crisp, practiced, not a single tremor now. Present. She did. He examined her stance, then leaned slightly closer. You remind me, he said quietly enough that only she could hear, of a cadet I once trained. She dropped her rifle too, first day of inspection. She went on to save 12 men in a fire at sea. Clara's breath caught. She didn't know what to say. He straightened and spoke louder this time. Dismissed, Recruit Hayes. You've done enough for today. As she stepped back into formation, the recruit's eyes followed her, but not with mockery anymore. Something else had replaced it. Respect. Uneasy, reluctant, but real. When the Admiral left, the field was utterly silent. No one dared speak until the sergeant barked. At ease. Even then, the usual chatter didn't start. Clara stood still, staring at the horizon where the Admiral had disappeared, the salt wind brushing her face. Later that night in the barracks, something strange happened. When Clara walked in, the room went quiet again. But this time, it wasn't out of ridicule. One of the recruits, the same one who'd bumped into her during inspection, stepped forward awkwardly. Hey, he said, scratching the back of his neck. That was something today. Clara looked at him, unsure if it was another setup. He swallowed. You earned it, Hayes. Respect, I mean. Guess we all had it wrong. One by one, a few others nodded. Someone clapped her on the shoulder. Good job out there. She smiled faintly, saying nothing. That night, she lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The laughter she'd heard for weeks was gone, replaced by a silence that felt different. Not empty, peaceful. But her story didn't end there. Over the next months, Clara rose quickly through the ranks of her training unit. She became a marksmanship instructor, leading by example, calm, patient, unflinching. The recruits who had once laughed at her mistakes now came to her for help, and she helped them, every single one, because she knew what it felt like to stand where they had stood, lost, unsure, afraid to fail. Then, one cold morning, months later, a surprise announcement came. Admiral Rourke was returning. When his car rolled onto the training grounds, whispers spread fast. But this time, there was no fear in Clara's chest, only gratitude. The Admiral inspected the unit again, his eyes scanning the lines until they stopped on her. Recruit Hayes, he said. Sir, he smiled faintly. Correction. Petty Officer Hayes now, isn't it? Yes, sir. He nodded. I heard about your progress. Impressive. And your shooting record, unmatched. Thank you, sir. He studied her for a long moment. Do you still drop your rifle? Clara grinned slightly. Not lately, sir, he chuckled softly. A rare thing for him. Good. But if you ever do, I'll pick it up, she said immediately. His smile widened. That's the spirit. He turned to the rest of the recruits. If any of you need an example of what perseverance looks like, look to her. The Navy is full of strong men, but it takes a stronger kind of heart to rise after humiliation. As he walked away, Clara felt something settle inside her. Not pride, not exactly. It was more like peace, a quiet certainty that she had earned her place not through perfection, but through persistence. Years later, when she became an instructor herself, she started her first speech with a line the recruits would never forget. They laughed when I dropped my rifle. A few chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Then she smiled, eyes steady. But then the Navy Admiral ordered everyone to stand. The room went silent. She told them the story, not for sympathy, but to show them that failure wasn't the end. That sometimes what breaks you open is what builds you stronger. That courage isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet, patient, and stubborn. Her story spread beyond the base. To other units, other branches, it became one of those whispered tales new recruits told each other before lights out, half inspiration, half legend. Did you hear about the woman who dropped her rifle and made an admiral stand for her? And somewhere across the world, in some training field or sea-bound ship, a young sailor struggling through their own moment of failure would remember that story and stand up again. Because the truth was simple. Everyone drops their rifle at some point. Everyone falters, stumbles, or falls. But what defines you isn't the fall. It's what you do after. And Clara Hayes, the recruit who once trembled under laughter, became the proof that sometimes the smallest moment of courage can echo louder than any roar of victory. Sometimes the story that begins with laughter ends with a standing ovation.